and then realized that we postponed it to this week. Thank you for coming back.
I have some people from the Bay Area, France, Berlin, New Jersey, Dubai, all over the place.
You know what, Shane? I'm so excited to be here for this workshop because for a long time it was you hosting these workshops. And then in the last few
Yeah.
months, I've been hosting more and more. And now this is our first workshop together.
It's the two worlds collide. I think I've probably done, I don't know, it feels like 100 of these, but it's probably only been 20 or 30. But it's been a while since I've done one, so I am excited to be back. More as a guest this time and then than the one hosting. So that's kind of fun. Different seat.
Oh well, you can take the host out of the host's seat, but you can't take the host's. I don't know. You'll be hosting a lot. We'll be
Yeah.
co-hosting.
Can't take the host out of the person, But yeah, maybe, thanks everyone again for joining. We're going to be doing showing some of our favorite things that we are using Mastra Studio for. We're going to talk about what Mastra Studio is, and I'm pretty excited to share some tips with everybody.
Yeah, and what's a little bit different about this workshop compared to others is that there won't be any slides or anything. The best way is to just show you. The only thing maybe that would be helpful, Shane, is if we just give a quick intro before getting into it. Would you like to introduce
Yeah,
yourself as a co-host?
sure. Yeah. So I'm Shane. I am one of the co-founders of Mastra. I run product here, former engineer, been doing open source stuff for a long time before this. I was actually very, very active in the Drupal CMS world. I did a lot with that in the open source land probably 15 plus years ago. So not to date myself or anything, but here's my X that Alex has on screen. And yeah, excited to be here.
And my name's Alex. I work on developer experience at Mastra. That basically means I want you to have the best experience you can. That means sometimes I'm making videos like this one I just posted on X, other times docs, other times workshops. And what we observed after using Studio and talking to customers and helping users is that it's one of the most unique things about Mastra. And yet, perhaps there are features you're underutilizing. And if you're building an agent, I think you want to use the best tools available to you. So the whole idea today is to show you how to spin up Studio. And we're going to show some of our favorite tips as we go along. I promise that while you might recognize one or two, you definitely won't recognize them all. What do
Yeah,
you
I think
reckon,
we have,
Shane?
what was
Tell
that?
me. Tell me. Yeah.
No, I was gonna say, I think we'll have a few surprises for people, right? Of things that they haven't seen. So some of them might not be new, but I feel like even some of them have been new to me, to be honest. So things like, oh, I didn't think about using it that way.
Well, let's spin up a studio real quick. So the best way to do this is to run the following command, npm create master at latest. I'm going to copy it from the homepage. And then let me know, by the way, folks, if my terminal is a good size, we can run the command. If you haven't previously run this, you'll have to OK installing Mastra. And then you give your agent or your Mastra project a name. I'm going to call it Awesome Mastra Agents. We'll pop things in the source directory. And at this point, if you're following along or you're starting up your first project, I would recommend picking a provider like OpenAI and then entering your API key. I'm going to skip that for now and do it afterwards. What I wouldn't skip, though, it's up to you, of course, but I highly recommend you enable the Mastra MCP server in your editor. I'll enable it and then show it to you a bit later because I promise it's going to get us out of a bind at least once before the end of the workshop. It basically gives your agent, such as Cursor, access to Mastra's documentation. So you're always getting the most up to date information and it can interpret things directly instead of you having to copy and paste things into the prompt. Although, do note, as I'll show you, that you have to set it up manually. Now, here we're starting from a project from scratch. It's a good way to get started, but you can also add Mastra to an existing project using the Mastra init command. I'll show you that in a little bit. Okay, so our agent and our project has been created. So I'm going to cd into the new folder. And what I'm going to do that you don't have to is copy over an environment file from my other directory because I want to help you guys out, but I don't want to show you my OpenAPI key either because I might get in trouble with my boss. And he's literally looking over my shoulder right now. So
Well, you have the copy environment variable trick that I've used on probably a dozen webinars or workshops. So it's the way to go.
So this scaffolds out a basic agent. And, whenever I see someone use a command like this, I get a bit nervous that it's doing a bunch of magic. But this is really scaffolding a very simple weather agent. We have a weather tool that allows a model to call it and get the weather for a given location. And then we have an agent that is guided by its system prompt to use that tool. Hmm. Okay, we've seen the code, but how do we run this? Like, what's the best way, the quickest way to interact with it? I could spin up a new front end and figure that out. I can maybe make a script or something, but I just want to build. I want to build. I just want to get into it. And so, what do you reckon, Shane? What should we do?
I think that's probably where Mastra Studio comes in. That's why everyone's here, right?
You know it. And so when you call Mastra, I just don't want there to be any smokes and mirrors here. When you call the Mastra create script or CLI, it will create a dev package script like this. And so I'm going to run that over here. And that's going to do sort of two things, really. The first is it's going to create a local development server with API endpoints. That could be useful during your development. But for today, we're going to use its second function, which is to make the playground available. And here it is. And do you remember that tool I showed you before, the weather tool? Well, I can execute it like so. And if I think about the agent, the weather agent, if I go to the agents tab here and click the weather agent, I can start talking about it. So that's the basic idea. Anything you can see in your master code, whether that's an agent, a tool, but also a workflow or an MCP server. Later, you'll see scorers in action or evals, as you might know them by. Anything you define in Mastra, you can interact with via the studio. So now you get the big idea. Shane, I'm curious because you were here at the very starts of Mastra. What was the impetus for Studio? Where did the idea come from?
So, you know, there's actually I think we stumbled upon it in a couple different ways, but I think it kind of ties back to my experience 15 years ago in Drupal and in WordPress and things where you wanted to be able to build or maintain a website without having to write code, right? But you did want access to the code to build plugins or modules or depending on, what you're building back at the time. And so you wanted some kind of admin UI to see things more quickly, right? And now today that's like, very commonly just a CMS. But I think, we wanted the same experience for building agents. We didn't want necessarily a no code tool because I think having access to the code gives you the flexibility to do whatever you want. But we did want some kind of UI to make you or to allow you to iterate really quickly. So you could get up and running and basically visualize that the code's working. So you didn't have to build your own UI. You could essentially use the one out of the box, get it really far, and then when you're ready, wire it up to your own UI and take it from there. So funny enough, the first version of Mastra, we actually ripped out the studio because it wasn't, we just made the call that it wasn't good enough. It just was
No
not ready.
way.
So like the very first version of Mastra, if you go way back, it didn't have like it had it, and then when we released, it was not there. So it was in the code. We pulled it out and because it just wasn't we wanted it to be good, and we knew at the time it wasn't good. And then we eventually added it back in, and it still wasn't very good. But that's been over a year, so it's gotten a lot better since then.
Yeah. Well, I joined the master team about 4 months ago now. And even in that short time, it's improved rapidly. And I'm very happy with where it's at. Honestly,
I,
one
I
of the
also
coolest things.
saw I also saw that you're using the pre V1 version, the stable version, and I'll show the beta version because that's what I started using. And I think we won't see any differences, but if you're paying attention, maybe there's a difference or two you can spot.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, since we're here with the agent, I wanted to show a couple of little features of the agents tab that probably uh, you've experienced using Mastra, but maybe you didn't know you could configure this or at least temporarily configure it via Studio. For example, I mean, just look at this list. There's always so many different models to choose from. It's not always obvious which is the best at your task until you test it. And with Studio, you can literally change the model just like that, and you'll talk to a different model. You'll have to take my word for it for right now, but in a little bit, we'll show you how to peek at what's going on under the hood via traces, and then you can get a sense for how this works. The other really cool thing is discoverability. For instance, if you can see that I have an OpenAI key set up, and that's why it has the green indicator. I could add to my environment variable different providers, and then I could access their models. You can also configure settings such as the temperature and top P to control the randomness, as well as provide arbitrary additional options. For example, provider options that control caching. That's a very common use case. And instead of fiddling with code and being a bit blind, you can just tweak it here and see how it affects the output, which will ultimately bubble up and be reflected in the quality of your application. We also have this memory tab, right? And in order to demonstrate this, we're going to have to write a little bit of code. I don't know if you know this, but Mastra has a couple of memory features built in. There's conversational history, which is what you see here. That's when Mastra remembers the previous messages to give the model context about what was spoken about recently. But that's only really good for the last maybe 20, 30 messages at most, only for context surrounding the current message. Anything more than that, and you risk it being lost. And that's where things like working memory come in. That would allow the user to specify a preference and remember it. But what we're going to talk today about is semantic recall and how we can build better memory for our agents by utilizing Studio.
Hey,
Now,
Alex.
yeah, tell
So
me.
we have a couple comments here. One says, "Can you please increase the font?" So maybe you need a click, one more click of zoom, possibly. Hopefully that'll help.
Okay.
Uh, there's one other question maybe that we should answer now. If you're asking questions, we will come back and get there. Someone did ask a question about can you use Open Router instead of directly using OpenAI?
That's a brilliant question. And the answer is yes, you absolutely can. You might get a little bit overwhelmed if you just scroll through this list because it supports absolutely hundreds of models, but you can certainly bring your open router key and unlock that world via Studio and your master agent.
And then there's a question about JWT auth. If you're using uh, the experimental auth, you may need to add runtime context in order to get the studio working, but maybe we can explore that in a little more detail later if you're not able to get it to work.
Thanks for your question. We can
All
definitely
right.
touch on that towards the end. Okay, so what I'm going to do, actually, let me just get orientated in my tabs, is yes, here's the project that we created together. I'm actually going to come back to something I spoke about earlier when I mentioned the MCP server. So we enable it via the create command, or we install it rather, but to enable it in Cursor, and it's a little bit different depending on each editor, you need to go to the settings, the tools and MCP page, and just make sure this box is checked. You can see all the different tools that you get and are now available to the agent. So the agent cursor in this case can actually look up our blog, look up the docs, and let's put it through its paces. I'm actually, because I try and avoid handwriting code as much as I can these days, and the workshop is no exception. I'm going to ask the agent to create a friend agent that remembers facts about my friends using semantic recall memory. Do not add, because sometimes you have to tell sometimes agents can get a bit overzealous, and I've noticed a few times that it will try to add working memory, which we don't need. And this is most likely, it's true that the latest models are aware of Mastra and can sometimes either generate Mastra code or they can infer things looking at the TypeScript definition files and what have you. What will sometimes happen is if it's stuck, it will call the Mastra docs tool, which is actually what happened. And let's see what comes out in the wash here. We're hoping to see an agent created that uses semantic recall. And then I can show it to you in Studio.
And we did have a question about someone saying the Mastra MCP server is not working for them. So the way that it works is it does download a package and it runs npx. So if you are getting it showing up red, you should be able to run the npx command directly, make sure it works in the terminal. there's a possibility there's something with your node environment on your machine, node versions. There are some things that could cause the MCP server not to work. But if you run the command directly, then you should be able to just test that it works on its own outside of cursor or wherever else. And then if it doesn't, hopefully you see some error messages, you can fix it in your environment, and then it'll work in cursor or wherever else you're trying to use it.
Well, if you're watching closely, you can see that the agent went in completely the wrong direction. That might be a problem with. I'm actually going to stop it here. Oh, I think it's dictating with Super Whisper, actually. Let me just make sure that's not going anymore. No, the agent made an error here because it started to create a tool when actually there's no need to do that. So here's some code that I prepared earlier. It's a friends agent that remembers facts about your friends. We supply it with a storage provider. Everything, our messages and any of our embeddings which relate to semantic research are going to go into this database right here. But you could also use other database providers, MongoDB or something, for example. We won't go too much into the details about how semantic recall works and embedding vectors, but suffice it to say, we need to configure Mastra. And here's the good stuff. Here are the options. We tell it the last messages, which is conversation history, and we set up semantic recall. It will retrieve the 5 most relevant messages to the given inputs, and it will also pull in 2 messages before and after that. I'll talk a little bit more about scope after, perhaps. But here's the cool thing. If we go back to Studio, and I'm in the habit of reloading things for good measure, but you don't always have to. And I go back to the agents tab. Uh-oh, where's the agent? Well, in order for Mastra and Studio to detect the agent, we actually need to pass it to our Mastra instance, which is an index.ts. So I'll come here and make it aware of the friend's agent and just import that real quick. And now when I go back, see, I didn't have to reload. So I think it's an old habit of mine, but you don't usually have to reload. And we can see the friend's memory agent is here. We can click into it. It'll automatically create a new chat. I can say hello. I can say something like, my old manager, Nick, is a vegetarian. And what's going to happen is that because we have semantic recall enabled, Mastra is going to store a memory in the database. Now, what's cool is that when we start typing here, for example, if we start searching for something related to what I wrote, like old boss, notice how we never really referred to Nick as an old boss. It still pulls up this previous message because it understands that boss and manager are semantically relevant. And so if I ask something like, what does my old boss like to eat? It should, it doesn't know precisely what Nick likes to eat, but it remembers that they're vegetarian. This is kind of cool because sometimes you want to know, like, what is the, what exactly is being pulled into the context window, like what memories are coming up. With Studio, as you start typing, it actually does the semantic recall right here, and you get a sense of what's being pulled into the context window, and it will allow you to configure those options, right? Sometimes people ask, like, what is the right top K to specify? What is the right message range? It always depends a little bit. And the nice thing about Studio here is that you can sort of see what happens and dial it in. Now, this test is kind of nice, but it's a little, you might not be completely convinced because it could just be using conversation history. But if I create a new chat, which will have its own conversation history, and I ask what diet preference does my old boss have, it should hopefully let us know that my old boss, even though I called him a manager, is Nick, and it knows that they're vegetarian. And this is because this type of memory is persisted across different threads of conversation. And so there you go. There's a quick little whistle stop tour of what Studio can do. And I just wanted to demonstrate that as you adopt Mastra features like memory, you'll usually find that there is some tab or some option that will help you build that feature more effectively and build a better agent.
All right, there's a few questions here. Maybe we can take. Joe did ask it, should semantic recall it be necessary for the previous message? Isn't and then I think you kind of answered it when you showed it can go across because it is resource scoped, it can go across threads. And yeah, that was a kind of a contrived example, but you can imagine it could have been a long time ago if you had enough messages. So that's why you can have so kind of that sliding window of last messages, plus then use semantic recall to get those further up messages. And Joe also asks about monorepos. So there are, and how basically how to get Studio to work with really large monorepos. There are a bunch of bundling options available in the Mastra server class or the Mastra class. There's a server object, there's bundle options in there, so you can mark certain packages as external. It's kind of there are some challenges with that, but you should have all the escape hatches you need to basically allow Mastra to work. There is something else that we're about to be released. It's actually, yeah, it's been merged. It hasn't been deployed yet, but we've been having this come up more often where sometimes you have a really complex setup and you kind of need the escape hatch where you don't want to have Mastra handle all the bundling for you. So we're going to have basically server adapters so you could use, basically spin it up and use it in the backend of a Next.js app or maybe a Nest.js backend or an Express server or something like that. So it should help with larger monorepos, bundling issues, things of that nature. So you have some things you can already try, and then we're going to make it even easier if you do have something really complex and you just want that escape patch. And then, oh, yes, I just got a question. When are server adapters going live? Hopefully next week's release, but TBD, but coming soon, very soon. All right. And I think there's a couple things that I wanted to show, and then maybe we can keep some more questions coming. So one thing that
Yeah,
we
let's swap
released,
roles. I'll keep an eye on the chat and feel free to share your screen.
yeah, one of the things we released recently is the ability to do like approved tool calls. So I think human in the loop is an interesting challenge, right? Sometimes you want the agent to go off and just do its thing. Other times you want some level of control over when the agent does very specific tasks. So I have just an example here, nothing too fancy. I have a couple agents. I'm just going to use this very basic weather agent because it's very similar to the one you were showing, Alex. But I can just ask, what is the weather in London, which is, that's where you're at, I think, right? So, of course, it works. Let's imagine this wasn't a weather tool and this was a delete database tool, right? I would maybe sometimes want certain tools to not just automatically run without some kind of approval process. So we recently added the ability in Mastra. So if I go to tools, I go to this weather tool. It's very similar to what you saw Alex working with earlier. I should be able to, if I remember the right API, to just add require approval true to this weather tool. And now if I come back and I start a new chat and say, what's the weather in Sioux Falls? It's going to tell me what it wants to use for the input. It's going to ask if it can do that. And so let's say, I do want to drop this database, or in this case, I do want to get the weather. I can approve it, and it'll then do the result and then follow through and continue on the step. So it's a very easy way to add a human in the loop tool, but only for specific tools that are maybe more sensitive, right? I could give it some tools that don't require approval and some tools that do. Of course, we have some docs on how to implement this in your front end. So you can do the same process. If the agent tries to call this tool, it'll stop, and then you'll have to pass in the payload to say like, yes, it's approved. But that's kind of one human in the loop aspect if you're using agents. Another one that I think is worth showing is when you're actually using workflows. So if you're not familiar with workflows in Mastra, it's essentially a way to be more deterministic about steps. So you can build a step-by-step process, and some of that is going to call out to agents. Some of that will be more deterministic, just code. We can look at what this workflow does here in a second, but maybe the first step is let's just see how it works, and then I'll show the code so you can actually get the details. So Alex, where do you want to go on vacation? What kind of vacation? What's the dream vacation for you?
I love Colorado in America. Let's go there to the Rocky Mountains.
Does that how I spell Colorado? I don't
I'm sure
know.
South Dakota is cool as well, by the way. But
Yeah. Well, yeah. Go to the Rocky Mountains, Rocky Mountain area. Give it a little more broad. So this is going to first run this step, generate suggestions. This is going to call out to an LLM. Okay. Sounds like we want to go to maybe Aspen. Let's go to Aspen. That sounds good. That's in Colorado. Aspen. So basically it says, it stops, it suspends, it waits for me to. So I could probably do, Aspen, I could do Colorado. Let me just do Colorado. So it would ideally it gives me the options. If I had a UI, I could display them, but then of course wait for the human input. And then it's going to build the travel plan, basically a trip plan from my human input. So again, this is another way to do human in the loop and basically allow you to guide the process of what the agent is actually doing. And so if I go to Travel Planner, I can get all the JSON. I can also, I think it prints to my terminal that's running the server. So you can see these are the suggestions. Here's the travel plan. So Alex, you're going to arrive in Denver. You're going to go to Rocky Mountain National Park. You can do some scenic drives and wildlife watching, some adventure activities, hot springs and relaxation. That sounds nice. Return to
I've
Denver and
actually
then
been there to the hot sulfur springs.
have you?
Yeah.
I have not. Maybe this is my travel plan.
Well, it's a good plan.
All right. Well, take it from Alex. But let's look at how this actually works. So if we go into the code, there's, as Alex was showing, there's going to be workflows, and we have this travel workflow. And if I go into the travel workflow, there's going to be a step called generate suggestions. I actually like to go down to where the workflow is actually exported first, because this is kind of where you get the structure of it. You're creating a workflow. There's first, we're going to generate suggestions, then it's a human input step, then it's a travel planner step. So really simple workflow. You can see it's very linear. You could, of course, have branches and do way more complex things with workflows. But if we look at the important one is like, how does this human input step actually work? If we look at it, it's every step has an input schema and an output schema. So it's going to get a list of suggestions. The output schema is a selection, and the resume schema is a selection. So basically what happens if we don't have a selection, we just suspend, pass the suggestions back to the user. But if this workflow gets called again with the selection, then it will return and continue on to the next step. So it's basically a really simple way to suspend or to just pass on the resume data to the next step in the workflow. So a really simple way to add human in the loop to Mastra workflows. But the nice thing is in the studio, you can test it before you have to wire up all these API calls in your front end.
How would that look in your front end? There's a few questions about if there are components for this and how Master plays with other frameworks like Copilot Kit and stuff like that.
Yeah. And at Mastra, we don't have, we obviously have a lot of options, but we don't have strong preferences. We want to work with all the popular tools. So Assistant UI is very popular, Copilot Kit's very popular, AI SDKs, UI elements is also a popular choice. We also have a Mastra client, so you can kind of wire this up to your own stuff if you wanted to roll it yourself. So you have a lot of options. The component libraries are nice if you're just getting started because you can kind of grab things off the shelf and wire them up and kind of hook up the details, but you don't have to necessarily come up with the UI interactions yourself. Often this ends up being, there's chat interfaces for this, but also you could think of any kind of, like multi-step form builder UI for planning a trip. So there's different ways that you could see something like this trip planner visualized. And it kind of just depends on what you want to build for your users.
Natalia is asking if this will be recorded. Yep, you can find it on YouTube right after. Alex Botwin, thank you for your question. They asked if when passing context between agents, does working or semantic memory apply? Yes, they could both be useful in that scenario. And then
And you could actually share memory between agents if you wanted to. That's all possible. It just kind of depends on how you want to architect it. Most of the time, it's each agent has its own memory, but if you wanted to have a shared memory, you could configure that and use it that way.
Yannick was wondering if they can monitor the LLM costs with Mastra or if they need to integrate something like LangFuse for that kind of monitoring.
Great question. We're going to get to that in a little bit, but you can, the answer is yes, you can monitor some of it. LangFuse definitely has some features that we don't have. So, we like the team over at LangFuse as well. So there are some things that you may get with LangFuse that Master doesn't have out of the box. So there are some cool things you can do there. But a lot of the basic stuff that you might need, especially as you're getting started, are all built in. But we'll show a little bit more on that in a bit.
I love that example you gave, Shane. And by the way, folks, here's an example of a UI connected to not a dissimilar workflow. This is by someone named Ryan Carson who shared what they're building on their own live stream. I just wanted to screenshot it and build on what Shane said, because while you can interact and start and resume your workflow directly in Studio, you can also use it to kind of monitor your workflow once it's connected to a UI. That's a great way to like peel back a layer and observe what's, I don't want to play audio here, what's going on under the hood. Am I not sharing my screen or am I?
Yep, I see it.
Okay. Uh, Zoom just popped up asking me to share it, so I worried. But yeah, that's pretty cool, right, Shane?
Yeah, and I do like that in this example, Ryan is basically has a underlying workflow, which is a whole bunch of agents for different steps of a form, and then the process is just chatting with that workflow. So it's like a chat interface with the, but you can see progress along the way as you kind of go through multiple steps.
It's quite interesting you should mention that because I've recently been building something similar. Here's my uh, next chat. This is a Next.js application, which if we look at the code, and let me just reset here for a second. I really appreciate those questions about connecting to a user interface because we totally get it. Studio is great to get started with, and it's a good tool to prototype and develop your agent. And as you go into production, you can observe and things, but ultimately, you're not putting Studio in front of your users. Every product has a user interface. And this is actually an example of using AI SDK UI with a workflow chat built with Mastra. What do you reckon, Shane? Shall I give a quick demo and then peek at the code?
Let's do it. That'd be cool.
So let me
And I
run
think
this
you led me
quick.
into that. You teased the Ryan Carson one, and then now you're coming and showing that, oh, wait, we have you built your own.
This ain't my first rodeo. So here's an interesting situation because what we're looking at is a Next.js application. And whereas before we were running Mastra in this kind of dedicated standalone server, you saw us, right? We ran the local development server and that gave us Studio. In this case, I've actually integrated Mastra and bundled it in a full stack application. As you can see, it's in the source folder right alongside my app router code for Next.js. And you might be thinking that the only way to use Studio is if you only use the local development server or if you're only building a Mastra dedicated server. But actually, it's entirely possible to run the Studio anywhere. All you have to do is run the Mastra dev command. And the Mastra dev command will basically look at your source code and look in a few paths to try and find your Mastra index.ts file. And as long as it finds it, it will run that Mastra project in isolation from the Next.js project, in this case on port 4112. And we can see here's the contact sales workflow. I want to show you the workflow and then I'll show you the user interface I built on top of it. So check this out. We press the run button to start the workflow and we give an input. Just imagine this is uh, or let me not imagine, sorry, you're literally looking at it, but this is essentially an agent that allows users to contact the sales team. And in order to contact the sales team, we want to pre-qualify them a little bit and learn about them, get their contact info, make sure their support query is relevant to the sales team. And so say I just put some junk input in, like I just give it the letter A, well, the workflow immediately suspends again, this time with a suspend payload that gives a validation error. That doesn't look like a valid email. Could you enter a work email? And so let me try again. I'll go a.com. This is technically a valid email. This step completes, and we now move on to ask the name. my name is Alex. We press resume, and now it will ask for a query. What's quite interesting about this query step is that it's actually going to let me just flex a little bit here. I'm going to go over to the agents tab and show you the query classifier agent. And this is essentially a sub agent of the workflow that will determine if the given input is relevant to sales. So if I ask for code help, it's going to probably say, nope, this is not a sales query. If I ask to upgrade a plan, then it will say it is a sales query. And we coerce with the prompt. We use the prompt to coerce the model to output JSON. But then Mastra actually has a structured output feature as well. So you don't have to parse this. You can just access the object. But the way in which I feel like I'm flexing a bit is if I go back to workflows, click contact sales workflow, you can see the previous runs here on the left. And I can just go back to where I started. And doesn't it feel like everything the Mastra agent can do, you can do in Studio? And you just have this fluidity about how you develop your agent. And so now I give it a query like code that gets sent to that sub agent I just demonstrated. So you'd expect it to come back by suspending again. And because I'm so zoomed in, I can't see the button, but we suspend because it's not a valid query. And then we say upgrade plan should resume just fine onto a final confirmation step. So again, like Shane was saying, it's very similar to what Shane was demonstrating. I only show it you again to illustrate that when I come over here to the chat interface and I say hello, it says, thanks for reaching the sales team. I'd grab your email. And if I just give it the letter A, it's like, hey, it doesn't look like an email. Here's a valid email. I'm basically going through the exact same workflow, right? But users don't want to go through that step-by-step interface. They want to use something familiar and conversational. And that's how we build a chat interface on top. I can talk about upgrading the plan. And to my point about being conversational, okay, we're confirming, is it okay to submit? Does the user have to type true? Do they have to type false? They can type anything that sounds even a little bit affirmative, like, yeah, go for it. They can talk to it naturally because the workflow, that particular step will call it different. Can I show you? Yes, I can, because it's here in Studio. Here's the sentiment agent that you give it input like, yeah, and it determines if it's affirmative or negative. And I've actually prompted this to, some things are a bit ambiguous, right? Like you might go, that's got to be negative because it's not like a definite yes, right? We don't know if they want to go ahead. And so just going to have a quick peek at the code. There's much better documentation you can go into to learn a bit more. We're using AI SDK on the client here, as well as AI elements. That's a UI component library based on ShadCN that works very well with AI SDK UI, which, as you can see, also works very well with Mastra. If you wanted to do that kind of confirmed dialogue like you saw in workflow, AI elements actually has a component pre-built for that as well. And then in this particular case, we have a Next.js API route handler. I won't go too much into the details here because they're not strictly germane to Studio, but I did want to illustrate to you that it's possible and just really put the final point on Shane's example there in that you can connect it to a user interface should you so choose. I think where the Studio then becomes very useful is to kind of observe what's going on under the hood. And one of the best tools to do that is traces. Maybe Shane, you could maybe we can look at a few questions and then we can talk about traces. How does that sound?
That sounds good. Yeah, we're getting a bunch of good questions, and hopefully we can get to them all. If not, we always come to Discord and ask away. If we don't get to your questions, we're very active on our Discord. But there's one that I think was just sent to my DM in Zoom, but something around not able to, an issue with Master Cloud. Please reach out on Discord or find me on X, or uh, we will follow up and we'll figure out what happened. Maybe there's a setting on your account. Maybe there's something with the project. Definitely want to get to the bottom of that. I think there's a contact support form in Cloud now. Reach out through that, and we'll reach out to you and figure out how to get help. Actually, you can email support@mastra.ai as well. All right, so one other question. I created an agent factory to allow our users to create their own agents with their own contexts, but I can't track those agents' performance inside the studio. Well, you should be able to still see the traces, so we're going to talk about that here in just a second. It's a good lead in, but I'm assuming you're using our runtime context where you can basically build, what we often have people do is they build kind of like rough wrapper agents, and then using runtime context, they might change the system prompt or the tools for specific users, right? Maybe a user has access to different tools because they've connected, this user only connected their email and this user connected their calendar. And so that agent that is maybe a assistant agent to help with your scheduling knows it has access to this user's calendar, but this other user only has access to their email or something. So you should be able to do that. And with that, you you should be able to see that the agent is in Studio still, and those traces should still come through. We're adding some more filtering options to traces soon. So, but maybe we should start with just showing what traces are. All right, so let's look at that. So we ran these workflows. I did have some conversations with agents. So let's actually see if we click on observability, we can see here, there's these two agent runs that I ran. There's these workflow runs. So if we look at this, let's try to see what this one was. I said, what's the weather in Sioux Falls? And you can kind of see what it was. And you're able to kind of step through and see, okay, they did this tool call. This was an approval. It just kind of came through. And eventually we should be able to see uh, the output here. And we can kind of click through this one as well. So this one it was a longer response, as you can see. And you can see that's the actual response. This one's a little different because there's a human input step. So I think it might actually break this into two traces because it stops and suspends and then it resumes. But we generated suggestions. I'd like to go to the Rocky Mountain area, generate, and then you can see that this is going to generate 3 suggestions. That's what the agent is doing. And then it stops here and passes the suggestions on. And then this one is where it came back in. So it had the human input, which I should be able to see. I said I wanted Colorado, if you remember that. And then it runs this travel planner, which you can see here's the actual output for the travel plan. So we can make that a little cleaner. But you can see that I can step through and see what is happening, how are users interacting with agents and workflows. Of course, this is nice when you have it running locally and you're experimenting and iterating on building out these agents and workflows, but it's even nicer if you have production users and you have your own UI. And so that's where Master Cloud comes in. We'll talk about that a little bit, but that kind of answers someone's question around how do you deploy Studio into production. So one other thing I did want to point out though is that if I go into this agent, we'll just go back to this weather agent. You can see I have a bunch of scores here. And scores are essentially a way to evaluate the agent's output. You can use another LLM to basically judge with the context I was given, was this a good answer or not a very good answer? And this can be really useful. Often it's called evals. We have a whole bunch of kind of what we call off-the-shelf scores. They can be useful depending on your use case. I think the best way is to actually just write your own that ties very closely to your business logic, and it's not that hard to do. But I want to show you kind of multiple ways that you can look at this. So we can run Mastra scores here, and I'm just in this repo here, and I can run Mastra scores list, and it's going to give me a whole, oops, Mastra scores list. It's going to give me a whole list of the available off-the-shelf scores I could pull in. And I already did this with answer relevancy, but essentially if you do Mastra scores, add answer relevancy, it will add it, and I can just show you what it does. It drops in this score here. This one is very simple, like there's not much to it, but I could then customize this code. I could actually extend this function if I wanted to. I could change it, and all you need to do to add it to your agent is then come in here and say, here are the scores. I added answer relevancy. I gave it an, I passed in the actual score. The sampling is like what's the rate at which you want to score your results? Scores could be expensive, right? If you have LLMs that are running every time as like a follow-up to your every agent call, you run another multiple LLMs to judge it. So you might want the rate to be 10% of the time or 5% of the time, and just to get a general gauge. At the beginning, you probably want this high, right? But as you get more confidence, maybe you lower the rate and reduce your costs. But it's nice to be able to see those in Playground. So let's actually take a look at that. So let's just say, what's the weather in San Francisco. I am not running the server, so that would make sense. So we're going to start that. We'll try again. And you will notice that my previous observability is going to go away because I'm only storing it locally. So every time I restart the server, it resets. I can, of course, do that in if I can persist that storage if I want to a Postgres database to other solid like persistent storages. Right now, I could even persist it locally to a file if I wanted. Right now, it's just kind of in memory. And I did realize now why the observability had two traces for when I asked for the weather, because I added that tool approval step. So the first one is basically the first step, waited for my input, and then it continued on the agent run, which might make these scores kind of interesting. But you can see I can check the scoring. I can see all the available scores for this. So I could go to tool accuracy. It actually already did this one, but if it didn't, I could rescore it. You can see the answer relevancy, the translation quality, which that's just an example one if we wanted non-English translations, and completeness. So I can click on an individual one and it'll tell me the score. It gives me the input and output. And some of these, I think answer relevancy is one, will give you reasoning. So if you want to add reasoning to your score to have it explain why, it tells why. So it's again, I think people are often scared of evals because they do seem very complicated. They're just like non-deterministic software tests in some ways. I do believe that, as you can see, writing an eval is not doesn't have to be a lot of lines of code. If you can even look and see what makes this up, it's just basically a prompt to an LLM, and you pass in the model. But if you can match giving a score the right context, have it actually create a score, and then judge based on that, you can start to have some more confidence that you could potentially have a data set that runs against these scores. You can score live data and make sure that over time things are not getting worse or that it's staying persistent, and ideally getting better as you're improving your prompt, improving your context engineering for your agents. So yeah, that's scores. And that's how you use scores in Studio.
Is it possible to see the context window in Mastra Studio?
So you can, in observability, what let's run. Let me go ahead and turn off this require tool call because I think that makes things a little harder to see. And we can take a look at what's possible there. So I'm not going to require approval anymore. We'll come back in here. Let's just say weather in Seattle. All right, and then if I go to observability, I can see exactly what was passed in from the input and the attributes. And so these, it doesn't, I guess, it gives you the metadata. It doesn't tell you exactly the the context window, I guess, from this. Let me see if we can actually see it here. Okay, here it is. So here's the actual message that was passed in. So this is like, if I wanted to call OpenAI's API directly, this is the JSON that was sent over. So this is the context window, right? This is the system prompt and then the
Yeah,
message of the user. So yes, the answer is yes. You just got to kind of like dig into the right and find the right trace.
it might be a little bit tricky to demonstrate because I set up memory on my end and now Shane's showing traces on his. There's a question about if you can see uh, the memory working through this tracing, and you absolutely can. You'd see it represented in the context window, like Shane just demonstrated.
Yes. Yeah, let me go back to a thread once and see what about
We have
Sure.
about 5 minutes left, and I think if we have time, it would be good to do some like quick fire type tips. I'd love
Yeah,
to see
let's
the prompt enhancer in action, for example.
okay. Yeah, let's do that real quick. So a few things that you can do in Mastra Studio is you can actually change this prompt. So don't call the weather tool. Only say hello in all caps, no matter what. So if I want to edit the prompt and I can say weather in London, and this should, it, of course, it just uses the prompt. This is very similar to I can change the model, I can change the system prompt. I can add some comments and have it enhance the prompt here, which will use whatever model I have selected. So I could select a different model, click enhance prompt. Um, Let me reset and say, make it always respond in Fahrenheit, not Celsius for the weather. And this
So
should,
American.
yeah, because I don't, I need to know in something I can understand, right? Did it actually work or did it not? I don't know if that actually worked. Might have something set up wrong. But the one other thing that I'll show on this, the ability to like iterate on these prompts is if you go to Master Cloud, one of the things we always got asked is how can I get my Master Studio in production so I can one see observability, but also a lot of times I have people that are less technical on my team that want to play around with the agents that we're building, the workflows, things like that. So you can use Master Cloud. It should look very similar, right? Like ultimately it's meant to be almost a one-to-one in with parity with what you see locally. There's some subtle differences, of course, project settings. If I go to my team, I can invite members to it, all of that. But if I go to the weather agent, this comes in, it's going to look very familiar. I can change this prompt right here. So someone less technical on your team could change the prompt, change the model, try different things. The scores could run. They could see how it's scoring, and then if they got something that they liked, they could basically provide that information, feedback back to you, the engineer. You could implement it, test it yourself, and then kind of push it up. So there still is like a way to kind of get the less technical folks involved in the process early, or if
Hmm.
nothing else, let them see what you're building, if you're building these agents and workflows. So that's
I have
another
a
quick.
question for you while you're in cloud. Say I deploy my master agent and like I see there's a traces tab in there. Do I have to deploy it to cloud for that traces tab to work?
You do not have to. So you can actually, if you go here, set up observability, you'll actually be able to, I don't know what's going on here. Um, Interesting. Might be an issue going on. It'll basically just an environment variable that you drop into wherever you deploy Mastra. So you can deploy Mastra to any deployment provider, Vercel, uh, Cloudflare, AWS, GCP, any of those places, and all you do is drop in an environment variable, or you can even send up your local traces, which is something that if you wanted to test, you could run Mastra locally in Studio, add the environment variable, and it'll start emitting the traces into your Mastra Cloud project. So you don't have to deploy to Mastra Cloud. I think that's in the early days you kind of had to, but we've separated that out. So if you want to deploy wherever, but you still want to use Mastra Cloud for traces, you can do that.
Thank you for showing that. That's brilliant. We have a
Uh,
couple of minutes left. If there's any just last questions about Studio, we'd be happy to help you. Uh, if you maybe think of a question later, where can people ask Shane?
Yeah, we have a very active Discord. I'd encourage you all to jump into our Discord if you have questions. Otherwise, find me on X or LinkedIn or wherever and ask away. I try to answer as many as I can. And yeah, we always like to hear what people are building. So if you're using Master for something, please let us know. We like to see it. We like to talk about it. We like to help you out if we can. And I know we had a bunch of questions. Maybe we maybe didn't get to everything, but
There's a question by Joe Roddy. We can't answer it due to time, but I just want to say thank you, Joe, because I recognize you from some other workshops as well, and we appreciate you tuning in. And thank you everyone for joining and hanging out. We promised that we promise, please, just one more thing in the chat. We promised you that you would learn at least one thing that you didn't already know about in Studio. Would you be so kind as to type in the chat what you might have learned or what feature stood out to you? It's so great. Like, yeah, I'm actually going to hang on for 90 seconds because
Yeah,
I'd love to
and
hear.
and while that, I'm gonna rapid fire just a couple things that are
Yeah.
either here or coming. So in Master Cloud, one of the things we've been asked about a lot is the ability to uh, how do I get my Mastra agents into other UIs, not just my own custom UI, but the common one is Slack. So in Master Cloud, we'll be releasing soon. And so keep an eye out. We'll be releasing early access if you want access to Slack agents, where you can basically deploy to Master Cloud and one click install that agent into your company's Slack. That's coming. So it's I can release it to people behind a feature flag now. We're kind of in early testing. So if you do want access to that, find me. We'll be posting about it and we'll have like a sign up form and we'll be slow rolling out to people who maybe want to turn their Mastra agents into Slack agents and be able to DM them in channels and talk to them directly. One other thing is the ability we showed workflows, the ability to kind of time travel and replay workflows from different steps is also coming. That's very soon. It's going to be launched in a pretty, maybe, I don't think it's going to go out this week, but I think it's going to go out next week. So you'll be able to even better iterate on your workflows and test different scenarios.
Yeah, because Mastra release every Thursday, right? I don't think we talk about that release. It's kind of
It's
exciting.
usually
Like,
it's usually every Tuesday, but often we do Tuesday and Thursday. It just depends.
okay, well, we'll see. But I think
Tuesdays we almost always release, and then Thursdays is sometimes we do a second release during the week, just depending on if we have more stuff we want to get out.
and I love that. Like, it's fun to use a tool because I'm a user, right? And it's fun to use a tool that there's always like updates happening and you've got something to look forward to. And if you're anticipating something like what Shane's talking about, those are the days to check. And yeah, I've just dropped your handle, Shane, as well as mine in Zoom. So feel free to follow us, but more importantly, DM if you have any questions. Contact Shane about cloud if you want access. If you have like technical questions, you can hit me up, and who knows, I might even make a video answering your question. It wouldn't be the first time.
Yeah, and if you are in our Discord and want access to the Slack bot, let us know. We'll be sending out the form later today. We'll post it on X as well. Or you can always email support@mastra.ai and we'll send you the form to fill out if you want access to this feature.
Well, thanks again, folks. I think that is indeed everything. You can, if releases are Tuesday and Thursday, the workshops are definitely on Thursday, and we'll be right back. We'll be back next week at our regularly scheduled time with another workshop. We have a few good ones planned going out until the end of the year, including things like agent networks. I'm stoked about the evals one, Shane, because when I asked about what people got from this session, evals came up in top rank. So there's definitely more to talk about there. So if that's interesting to you, keep an eye out because we'll be having a workshop on that before the end of the year.
Awesome. Well, thank